Well, welcome to the FMS YouTube channel. Whether this is your first time or you're returning for more, thanks for being here. My name's Braden. I'm going to be hosting today's video, and in this video we're going to be talking about the new EPA regulations that are affecting the HVAC industry and how they apply to the marine industry and affect us here at FMS. So this is going to be a long video. I'm going to put chapters down below in the video description, and hopefully YouTube segments the video out so you can skip to the parts that are important to you, but I definitely recommend sticking through the whole thing. But if there are parts that you want to skip ahead because you already understand or know what I'm talking about, go ahead. We're going to be doing a really deep dive into what the EPA regulations mean and how they're affecting us here for the marine industry and for FMS. Now, I'm going to be grabbing some content and things from other places. Anything that I use in the video that will be sourced, I will be accrediting properly, as well as putting links down in the description, so you can go check out those resources for yourself. And they'll be shown with a little asterisk at their point in the video with where I got it from and where you can go look at these resources. So a lot of other really great places have done similar videos about this topic, about the new A2L refrigerants, about the new EPA requirements. Definitely recommend going checking them out. Go out and check out the HVAC School YouTube page or the ESCO Institute for HVAC Excellence. They are fantastic YouTube channels that I myself really enjoyed watching. So they've gotten some really good videos about this, but we wanted to make a video specifically talking to our customers and any potential customers, as well as people that have marine AC units that want to learn more about marine AC units, or people that don't have marine AC units and want to learn more about what's going on in the industry and how that's affecting us directly. There's obviously not as many people talking about us as there is about commercial and residential, because those things are already in place, those things are already in play, they've already been planned. While the marine industry, we're getting a little bit more time and things are not as smooth as with everybody else. So let's get into it. Let's talk about this. So when we're talking about the EPA regulations that are changing, I think the really important thing to first start talking about is, hey, what's the EPA? So if you're not aware, the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. And what they are is they're in charge of creating and enforcing environmental laws. They conduct research to improve upon existing environmental regulations, and their goal is to protect human health and the environment. So there you go. That's what the EPA does, and kind of their overarching theme. Now, the way that the EPA affects the HVAC industry directly, their primary focus is to regulate the use of refrigerants, which limits what they can be used for in current equipment. So they're handling everything that a refrigerant might be affecting or be produced in, imported, what have you. In order to work on systems that contain refrigerants, technicians must pass the EPA Section 608 exam or 609 if you're an auto technician. Now, I've actually passed both of them. The EPA 608 actually overrules the 609. I got my 609 first back when I first started in the industry, and then I got my EPA 608 when I was going through school. So the EPA 608 and the 609, these are to make sure that the person that gets the certification has the knowledge to properly handle the refrigerants. There's a lot of things to keep in mind, both for safety and how the equipment operate. Just coming at it with no knowledge is not a very smart move when it comes to looking at how this equipment operates. The EPA also plays a part in how systems are designed, how they're installed, maintained, and disposed of. They play a major role in each of these areas. When it comes to the design process, they're looking at like the different materials you can build it out of, the different oils, how much refrigerant can go in order for different changes to come into effect, different rules, different regulations for that. When they're installed, we're talking about like how much refrigerant you add into the system and how does that affect the change in the system, and how much vacuum to pull on the system, and how to properly handle the refrigerants during that installation, how to treat the equipment properly. And then when we're talking about maintenance, we're talking a lot about repairs. So if you have a leak, the EPA has a certain amount of refrigerant you can leak per year, whether you're a residential or commercial application, that they require that you fix that leak rather than just simply recharge the system. There's a whole list of things that they're going to go through. And then when it comes to disposal of equipment, they're looking at how the refrigerant is removed from the system and then either reclaimed and recycled or properly disposed of and removed from the industry as a whole. I've actually been to one of the reclamation centers when I was a technician up in Minnesota. They take old refrigerant that you take out of systems, they flush it out, they run it through a bunch of filtration systems, they purify it as much as they can, and then they actually resell it as recycled refrigerant. So it's kind of a cool process. So the new EPA regulations, they are part of the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act that was enacted in December of 2020. So the final rule was signed October 5th, 2023, and this is what it does. It restricts the use of high GWP HFCs that are found in aerosols, refrigerants, etc. The rule prohibits the manufacture and import of products that use high GW HFCs. That's a mouthful, and almost tongue twisted me there. And if you're not understanding what I'm saying, don't worry, we're gonna get there. I'm gonna talk about that. I'm gonna explain what these words mean. So with these new regulations, the industries were split into different sectors, different technology sectors, and restrictions were set, dates were set for each sector. The first restrictions were starting January 1st, 2025, and then the last restrictions come into effect January 1st, 2028. Now, the commercial and residential HVAC sector, they already got their restrictions that started on January 1st, 2025. The marine HVAC industry, from the last information that I have received, we have been given a 1-year additional extension until January 1st, 2026. So the way that this is working is there was a letter sent into the EPA saying that, hey, the marine industry is just not ready for this yet. We're not there yet. And so the EPA gave them an extension. Now, keep in mind that this is a constantly fluid changing thing. Things are constantly being updated and evolving with this conversation. The extension wasn't given until like mid 2024. So there's a lot that is still fluid and still changing, and things could change between today and January 1st, 2026. But for right now, our company is prepping and gearing for that January 1st, 2026 date. Now, one of the cool things about this is products made before January 1st, 2025 can be sold for 3 years after their manufacturing date. So if you have a marine air conditioner or a product that is sitting on a shelf and it was produced in 2024, it can still be sold until January 1st, 2028, which I believe is pretty cool, or at least the 3 years after that. So basically December 31st, 2024, you can sell until December 31st, 2027. As far as we are aware, as far as we know, with people that I've talked to in the industry, there's not a whole lot of equipment left that was manufactured in 2024. It kind of went gone very, very quickly. But it is still good to know that if you find something that is still available and it has that manufacturing date, it can be sold for 3 years after the manufacturing date. So something good to know. Now, when it comes to the air conditioners themselves, there is something to keep in mind, and they're treating this a little bit differently. It'll be interesting to see how they apply it fully. But there's 2 types of marine air conditioners out there. There's self-contained units and there's split systems. Now, the self-contained units are kind of the one that falls under that whole 3 years after manufacture, you can still sell this product and install it with no issues. The split system, there might be some problems with that. So a self-contained unit, like a window air conditioner or self-contained little roll-around air conditioner or a dehumidifier, they are already pre-charged with the refrigerant that they're ever going to have. You cannot access the systems basically, and they're done. You put it in the window, you set it down, you set it in a room. You don't have to charge it, you don't have to pull a vacuum, you don't have to do anything that we have to do for residential and commercial applications of air conditioning. So these products already come prepackaged, ready to go, kind of like a ready to go sandwich at a gas station. So these products, they're totally fine with being sold for 3 years, even after the restriction dates, because they're already done. There's no more work that has to go into it. You don't have to pull a jug of refrigerant out to work with these. Split systems is where this gets a little bit more funky. So split systems are when you take your compressor and condenser and you split that from your evaporator coil. So you've got your evaporator, your fan or blower, whatever, over here, and then you've got your compressor, your condenser, and the remaining components on this other side. Well, they can be split by something, 20, 50 feet long away from each other, and these systems can sometimes come pre-charged with refrigerant, or you have to add it in the field, or if they do come pre-charged, you might still have to add some based on how far away they are from each other. As it stands right now, there is no clarity on the marine industry for how split systems will be handled that I have seen. But the way that split systems have been handled in the commercial and residential sector is basically if you only are replacing one side of it, if you only replace the condenser or you only replace the evaporator coil, you can still do that essentially for the 3-year period / indefinitely. They're still allowing that equipment to be installed as repairs. Basically, they're looking at it as you're only repairing the system. But if you have to replace both sides of the system, you have to go with one of the new refrigerants. And I believe that's gonna, and if I'm going based off of the commercial and residential aspect of it, basically that's gonna happen for the marine industry if that January 1st, 2026 date comes down. Basically all split systems, if you replace both of them, you're gonna have to go with a new system. You can't just retrofit an older one into it. You'd have to replace one, wait a while, and then replace the other one within a certain period, and there's a whole bunch of rules around how long that has to be and things like that. So keep an eye out for this, and keep an eye out for how the industry might change around this. But the thing I wanted to touch on really quick before I move on, this ruling will not affect the repairs and maintenance on existing systems. Essentially, as long as parts are available, repairs can be made. So as long as they make the compressors, the motors, the refrigerant itself, you're good to go. As long as you can get a hold of those components, you can always make repairs, just like we can repair 100-year-old refrigerators and air conditioners. As long as you can find the parts for it, you're good to go. You can always make repairs on these systems. It's just that as they get older, as they age, it's going to be harder and harder to find those parts to maintain those systems. So the one thing I want to talk about when we're talking about these EPA regulations and how it affects us, the major way it's affecting us is through the refrigerants we're going to be using. And if I'm going to talk about the refrigerants, I have to start at the very bottom and talk about, well, what is a refrigerant? So I thought this was funny. Let's start with the dictionary definition. So the dictionary definition is a substance used for refrigeration. Well, I guess that's it. I can be done with the video now. Just kidding. That was not very helpful, and that's why I said it's kind of funny. You know, a refrigerant does refrigeration. Okay, well, so that happened. Well, as it so happens, I have my textbook still from when I was in trade school. And I was like, I bet this has a much better description on how this all works. So I went and grabbed two definitions from that textbook. Refrigeration is defined as the process of moving heat from a place where it is not wanted and transferring that heat to a place where it makes little to no difference. I'm gonna say that one more time. The process of moving heat from a place where it is not wanted and transferring that heat to a place where it makes little to no difference. So for example, on a boat, with the way our marine air conditioners work, I am sucking heat out of your boat, cooling your boat down, and then I'm dumping that heat to the water of the ocean, lake, river, whatever you're pulling from. So the little amount of heat that we just took out of your boat, and we're dumping that heat into a very, very large body of water. The chances are that that heat that I just added to that system didn't raise the temperature of the water all that much. If I raised the temperature of the water going through your air conditioner 10 degrees, well, I only raised the temperature 10 degrees for maybe a gallon of water, and there are a lot more than a gallon of water on the outside of your boat. So unless you're running on a fish tank where you've got about 10 minutes before that air conditioner is going to overheat, we're making very little to no difference in that large body of water. Now, a refrigerant in my textbook was defined as a substance that can be readily changed to a vapor by boiling it and then changed to a liquid by condensing it. And it had a key point to add to this. It must be able to make this change repeatedly without changing its characteristics. I'm going to say that again. A substance that can be readily changed to a vapor by boiling it and then changed to a liquid by condensing it. It must be able to make this change repeatedly without changing its characteristics. So essentially, I have to start with one chemical and end with that same chemical, no matter how many times I go back and forth between liquid and vapor, liquid and vapor, liquid and vapor. I still have to have the same chemical at the beginning as I do at the end. And not every chemical on Earth makes a good refrigerant, because there are some that change as they go through these processes. And you'd be surprised at what refrigerants are out there and what chemicals are considered a refrigerant. Take, for example, water actually has a refrigerant classification number. It's R718, and you can go and check this out. I had to, because I remembered it was a refrigerant, and for this video I wanted to show that it actually has a number associated with it. So R718 is just normal straight H2O. And why is water labeled as a refrigerant? Because you can boil it with heat and turn it into steam, and you can make it a liquid again by turning that steam back into a liquid. right? Just by cooling it down. So you can heat it up, turn it to steam, cool it down, turn it back into a liquid. Best example of that is obviously a boiling pot on top of your stove, or if I take a cold glass of Coca-Cola, put it on a table on a hot, humid day, all of a sudden all the water vapor in there is going to cling to that glass and it's going to turn into droplets, which is going to make the outside of the glass wet, condensation. So common refrigerants that have been used in the past, things that people are going to be more familiar than water, R718, is going to be things like R11, a commercial chiller refrigerant, R12, which a lot of people know as the old refrigerant in cars. R22 was a refrigerant that was used in home air conditioning. R134A is just recently been dethroned, and that was a major refrigerant in small refrigerators, cars, transport refrigeration, stuff like that. And then 404A was a commercial refrigerant and used in a lot of walk-in refrigeration, freezers and coolers, and just basically commercial in general. If you guys know reefer units that are on the front of semi-trailers, those had 404A in them. A lot of them did. I used to work for Carrier and install the refrigeration units on semi-trucks. And then R410A is the most common refrigerant that was used in home and commercial refrigeration and air conditioning up until just recently. So when we're talking about refrigerants, there's actually a couple different classes of these, and the old refrigerants fall under the CFC. You remember earlier I said HFC when talking about the EPA regulations. Well, there is an even previous one called CFC, and that was chlorofluorocarbons. And that was R12, R22, a lot of those older refrigerants. The reason they're labeled as CFCs, they were destructive to the ozone. And they were actually assigned an ozone depletion potential, or ODP number. Basically, for every one molecule of this chemical, it destroys this many molecules in the ozone layer of our atmosphere. So if you had a chemical, if you had a refrigerant that had an ODP of 1,000, that means that every single molecule of that refrigerant that got let out of an air conditioner, you're gonna go destroy that many molecules, that 1,000 molecules of ozone in the atmosphere. The EPA banned the production of these refrigerants in 1995, in December 31st, 1995. So, and that was part of the Montreal Protocol, getting rid of these refrigerants and moving away from ozone depleting chemicals. And so the next generation of stuff came with the hydrofluorocarbons. So over here, I'm gonna have R22, which was a chlorofluorocarbon. It had a chemical formula of CHClF2, chlorodifluoromethane. And then hydrofluorocarbon, I've got R410A, its chemical, which has R32 as the primary ingredient that does a lot of the work. That one is difluoromethane. And that one is CH2F2. So I'm gonna have these two charts and you can see their chemical formula and how they are different. And you'll notice that the R32 chemical does not have chlorine. That's what makes it different from it. The hydrofluorocarbons, so R32, do not destroy the ozone and have all been assigned a 0 for ODP. So everything after 1995, basically all refrigerants that we're going to be okay using, have a 0 ozone depletion potential. Instead, we are now focused on the GWP, or global warming potential, of these chemicals. And essentially, GWP is a measure of how effectively a greenhouse gas traps heat in the atmosphere compared to carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide has a GWP of 1. You following me so far? 410A has a GWP of 2,088. So for every one molecule of 410A, or 1 per pound of 410A that enters the atmosphere, we're doing 2,088 times the heat trapping that one amount of CO2 would in the atmosphere. So that's kind of how that all works. 410A, like I said before, is that blend of R32, the difluoromethane, and then it also has another refrigerant called R125. We don't really care about that one as much because that's not a whole part of this whole EPA change thing. R32 is kind of special because I'm going to come back to it here in a minute. So the reason that R32 is special is for this new ruling, they said, you know, they're not going to allow high GWP refrigerants anymore. Well, obviously, if you say high GWP, you must have a number in mind. So the new GWP limit is 700. So all refrigerants that are under that 700 limit are going to be perfectly acceptable for use in equipment under all of these restrictions. Some sectors were restricted to further levels. Some of them were down to 150 or whatever, but for our application for refrigeration, for HVAC equipment, we were set with a limit of 700. So R32 that I was just talking about has a GWP of 675. So it's just barely under that limit, but it's under the limit. So this is the refrigerant FMS has chosen to move forward with on both our self-contained and split system air conditioning systems, as well as our dehumidifiers. Now, to get under this 700 GWP limit, basically all refrigerants at this point now are classified as an A2L or higher. And we're going to talk about what that means. So you're looking at me and you're going, oh boy, we've talked about a lot of numbers and a lot of letters. Yes, we are, and we're about to talk about some more. So what does A2L mean in terms of refrigeration? So this was created by the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. Say that 10 times fast. Or ASHRAE. And they are responsible for the ASHRAE Standard 34, which is a system for assigning safety classifications based on flammability and toxicity of different chemicals. So I'm going to put up two different charts. This comes directly from ASHRAE right here, and this one over here comes from a separate thing I'm going to be linking down below. I feel like this is just a little bit more user-friendly of a chart, but basically they're saying the same thing. If you notice, there's a letter and then a number. And with A2L, you've got another letter. But basically the letter, the first part of that classification, is whether it's toxic or not. So A means non-toxic, B means toxic. The number, it could either be a 1, a 2L, a 2, or a 3, indicates the flammability level of that refrigerant. So 1 is the lowest, 2L is the next, 2 is next, and then 3 is the highest on that chart. So the refrigerants I mentioned earlier, 410A, 404A, 130A, etc., these are all A1, meaning they're non-toxic and non-flammable refrigerants, or not measurably flammable in certain test conditions. So they were all classified as A1s. Propane, for example, which is another refrigerant, I told you there were going to be some prize ones in here, is an A3 refrigerant, meaning it has low toxicity but high flammability. R32 doesn't fall in the middle, but it falls one step ahead of A1, meaning that it is a brand new classification where it means low toxicity and low flammability. Another thing that you may not have known as a refrigerant is ammonia, or R717. And this used to be a B2 refrigerant, meaning it had high toxicity and moderate, but still low flammability. Nothing close to explosive levels like propane or other A3s. But since the 2L meaning came out, they've actually changed ammonia from B2 to B2L, meaning it is highly toxic but low flammability. So rather than moderate flammability, got changed to low flammability. Not recommending this, but if you tried to put out a fire with ammonia, it's not gonna light. You know, it's probably gonna put the fire out. I just would run away from the ammonia gas that you just created. So, you know, ammonia as a chemical is not exactly flammable, which is why they gave it that new lower classification. This wasn't there before until a few years ago. Now, it is one thing to talk about this, but I believe in demonstration. So one thing that I want to show you, there's a lot of really good resources out there when talking about these demonstrations for the difference between an A1 and A2L, A2, A3. Chosen a couple different things that I want to show in this video. The first thing that I've chosen to show are actually some screen grabs. Now these are from a source that I'll link in the video description below. These are showing some testing data in a lab showing how an A1, an A2L, and an A3 behave in lab testing conditions, basically how they classify these chemicals. So this first one that's going to take over the screen, and I'm just going to talk behind it, is an A1. And this shows that the flame is staying inside those 90-degree angled lines in the video. So you can see there that they're highlighted in blue, and the flame does not leave the confines of that 90-degree angle. So this next picture right here, this is an A2L. And the difference between the A1 and the A2L is, if you notice, the flame is just barely edging outside of the 90-degree box that you see there that's highlighted in orange now rather than blue. So let me flip back and forth between the A1, there it is, and then the A2. So if you see, A1 stays within the 90-degree, A2, it's just barely, A2L, it's just barely outside that 90-degree angle. Well, this third one, This is an A3. So here you go. And hey, look at that. The entire testing chamber is filled with flame. So here, really quickly, let's recap. So A1, A2L, A3. Yeah, there's some pretty significant difference between the A2L and the A3. And between the A1 and the A2L, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two of them. Now, pictures are really, really good, and I really like this lab demonstration, and I think I've gotten my point across for how this all works. But I love a live demonstration even more. So I have gotten permission to use this clip from the ESCO Group. They will be credited and linked down in the video description below. This is from a video that Clifton Beck does of the ESCO Institute, Are Refrigerants Flammable? I highly recommend watching the full video, and like I said, I'll be linking it down below and sending credit over to them for making this video. What he's going to do is he's going to show attempted ignitions of 4 different refrigerants. And the 4 refrigerants he's chosen, the one for A1, he's chosen R134A. Like I said, that was a common refrigerant in cars for automotive air conditioning. An A2 called R152A. I'm gonna put a little picture up here, kind of show you. This picture right here is just showing kind of a brief overview of this refrigerant, showing that it's used in aerosols and stuff. And this is classified as an A2, so it's actually considered higher flammable than the A2L refrigerant. And the A2L refrigerant that Clifton chooses is R1234YF, or 1234YF, which has commonly become now the air conditioning refrigerant for cars and the automotive sector. And then the A3 that he chooses to go forward with is R290, or propane, like I discussed earlier. And he's going to be showing a couple different ways that he's going to try to ignite these refrigerants. He uses 3 different ignition methods in the beginning. 2 of them are hot surface igniters. Now, hot surface igniters, if you've never heard of one of these, we put them in furnaces, boilers, basically anything that has a open flame, like for heating your home or heating water. And what these do is these glow at about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we open a gas valve and we blast them with methane or natural gas and propane, and then boom, you get a flame, you get ignition, and then it's up to the furnace or device that now has the flame inside of it to check and make sure the flame is going, and then the hot surface igniter will stop glowing. So it gets really, really bright orange, and you're gonna see that in the video, and I think it's really cool to see one of these in the open air. When I was a technician working on furnaces and HVAC equipment up north, saw these all the time, replace them as needed. Very, very durable products, and obviously get extremely hot, and they are very good at igniting just about anything that can ignite when you touch them. And then the third thing he uses is a spark igniter, like you would find in a grill, except the one that he's using in the video is something like you'd find in a furnace or a boiler, again, that uses a Honeywell ignition system. And these would replace a hot surface igniter if the company decided they wanted to go with spark ignition rather than hot surface ignition in their application. He's going to spray the refrigerants, then after this add an open flame of a blowtorch, and it's kind of crazy. So we're going to check this out. It's about 5 minutes long. Huge disclaimer, please do not try this at home. I understand that so many people tell you, please don't try this at home, and the very first thing you want to do is, I'm going to go home and try this. Please don't do that. This is not a good idea. He puts a disclaimer at the beginning of the video that he is a trained professional, this is a controlled environment, and he has emergency personnel standing by in case anything goes wrong. So go check this video out and watch the whole clip, and then we'll continue to talk about it afterwards. Let's roll.
Okay, before it gets too dark, I wanted to show you what we're going to be using for this experiment. We have our A1, our A2, our A2L, as well as our A3 flammability chemicals. We're going to be using 3 different ignition sources that are going to be common to equipment that we know. A silicon carbide igniter, a silicon nitride igniter, as well as a direct spark ignition using a Honeywell ignition module. So we're going to see what we have for flammability on these 4 different classifications of flammable gases. All right, let's light this stuff up. So we're going to start with our 134A. It's about 80 degrees outside, so we should have about 100 psi in this can. We're going to use the trigger to adjust the velocity a little bit. And yeah, nothing lit so far. And let's move on to our 152A. Should be around 90 psia. Different velocities with the trigger. Yeah, still nothing. Okay, let's move on to our 1234YF. Should be around 104 psia. We're gonna get this sucker really hot. And yeah, still nothing. We can boil some sap out of the mahogany bit, and we can't get that 1234YF to light. What about some propane? R290, around 144. Of course, we're reducing it down with our regulator, but you can see that our propane lights pretty easy, and propagation is pretty high with a highly flammable gas. Okay, what about an open flame? We'll start with our 134A again, and yeah, there's nothing going on in there. So let's move on to our 152, our A2. Yeah, actually get just a little bit of flutter in that flame. Not a lot, but we can see a little bit. How about our A2L? Yeah, almost nothing. Okay, let's invert this can and see what happens when we go from liquid to vapor. Oh, looky there, a little bit of ignition on this igniter, not on that one, and nothing on the intermittent ignition. Okay, now let's try our A2, our 152A. Holy HFCs, Batman! Look at that flame. And that is with an A2, as it's converting from liquid to vapor, and not so much on ignition. And the moment we've all been waiting for, our A2L. And not really a whole lot. More like an A1. There's a little bit of flutter, but absolutely nothing on our electronic ignition. Oh, if I get it just right. And super, super hot ignition. Okay, let's see what happens with a direct flame. So our 134A, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit in there. Not a lot, but a little bit. As we increase our velocity, our propagation actually goes down. Well, what about our 152? Yeah, that's a lot of flammability. That was our A2. Let's take a look at our A2L, and, well, yeah, there's a little bit, so a little bit more than an A1, but definitely not as much as an A2.
So what does all this mean? Well, it really means that all refrigerants really are flammable. It just depends on the amount of fuel, the amount of oxygen, and the energy, and the amount of that energy that is in our ignition source. So when we look at our refrigerants, we need to understand that even our A1 refrigerants, this 134A, did ignite when it was in the right circumstance. It had to be changing state from liquid to vapor. All of our refrigerants here are showing examples of propagation when they're changing state from liquid to vapor in an open flame ignition source. Now, we didn't see those similar effects when we're talking about vapor, and we didn't see as much of it when we're talking about liquid in lower ignition sources, like our hot surface igniter and with our direct spark ignition. Very different ignition scenarios. So just be aware that all of our refrigerants have some type of flammability to them. Our A2L actually is much closer to an A1 than it is like the A2, and definitely nowhere near the A3.
So as you can see in that video clip, there's really not a whole lot to worry about. I think my favorite thing is at the end where he's trying to light it with the blowtorch, and it's just like, you know, not a whole lot is happening with a couple of the refrigerants, and obviously, you know, with the hot surface ignition at 2500 degrees, this just kind of shows you that you don't really have anything in your own home that's even hot enough to ignite these without doing it on purpose. And even if you're doing it on purpose, it's still pretty hard to do. And I think another thing that was a cool takeaway from this video, I bet you didn't know, or a lot of people were unsure of what they put in aerosol cans to make the propellants. Yes, a lot of propellants in aerosols is a refrigerant and has an R number. So every single one of those Dustbuster cans had the refrigerant in it that he tags out for that video. So, and I put little tags in kind of just saying that this can had this can had this over his video, but I think that was just a really good demonstration. And I think the key takeaway from his demonstration is that the thing about A2L refrigerants is they're just generally very hard to ignite. And they also burn very, very slowly. So even if you get them to ignite, they're going to put their own flame out eventually once they start. I've actually been told by some people in the industry and also by other videos that you can walk faster than the flame will move across the floor. So if I had this entire room filled with enough of this refrigerant gas to ignite, I could get the flame going over here and then it would basically fizzle out within a few feet or a few meters from the ignition source. And so basically if you accidentally lit a fire, you could just kind of walk away from it faster than it can move toward it, and then it's just going to put itself out anyway. These chemicals, these refrigerants don't want to stay lit. They don't produce enough heat to maintain that ignition once it's started. They need a really hot ignition source, and then as soon as they're ignited, it's kind of like a wave hitting the shore. The water comes up, hits the shore with a lot of force, and then just kind of goes, yeah, okay, well, now we're done. Now we're out. So even so, with how hard it is to ignite these, with these new classifications, with these new regulations from the EPA, there is a whole new generation of equipment that is hitting the streets right now. Now in these equipment, they're starting to put what are called leak detection devices, and these have been installed in both residential and commercial systems. Now this system is designed to kick in once you reach 25% of the LFL, or the lower flammability limit of that refrigerant. And basically the LFL, the lower flammability limit, means that if I need this much gas in order to ignite, in order to mix with the air of a certain space, in order to set off an ignition and be ready for that ignition source to come in and light that, this device is going to stop that at 25%. So here's what we need in order to start a fire. Here's what's going to stop it. Just done. You know, you're over with. And it's going to disable that equipment, it's going to stop the compressor, and it's going to turn on the fan and try to just push all that refrigerant out. A lot of these leak detection devices are going to be put in the evaporator coil, which is the part of the air conditioner that's going to be in your own home, because a lot of homes are split systems, and obviously in commercial you've got a package unit, but the evaporator is what is being in contact with the air of a store or business all the time. So it's going to disable that equipment, it's going to put out an alarm, and it's going to continue that alarm situation until the leak detector is satisfied that there is not a leak any longer. So that is something that they're doing now. However, with these leak detection systems, there is a caveat to this. Small air conditioners that contain less than 3.91 pounds, very specific number, do not need a leak detection system. So all the air conditioners that I produce, all of the standalone self-contained units and even split systems that we're starting to get into, none of them go over that 3.91 pound rating as of right now. And even if we did make a system that would, we would then put the leak detection system on it. Basically, they just don't have enough refrigerant in them to create an environment that you could ignite. Like, they just won't even get anywhere close to that lower flammability limit. A lot of these pieces of equipment that have that leak detection system on, they've got 6, 8, 10, 12 or more pounds of refrigerant. My self-contained units, my 24,000 BTU, barely breaks 2 pounds in the entire system. So just keep that in mind, that there's not a lot of refrigerant here to work with in these smaller systems, but just know that there are mitigation systems out there. As we're evolving with this whole conversation with the equipment that is entering the field, there are things still in place for handling this. And now that we've talked about, you know, the regulations, all the different things, I've explained the refrigerants, and then we saw Clifton Beck's demonstration video. One thing I wanted to finish this video out on is the good stuff about these regulations. Not a lot of people are talking about the good stuff of these regulations, and I really did want to get out some of the information, and some people have touched on this, but I just spent that whole video talking about the regulation, how it's affecting us and what's happening, and dates and numbers. But why don't we talk about some good news that came with these changes, okay? So the first big thing is we're looking forward to a safer and cleaner environment, and that's good for everybody. This is not a political video. I have no political affiliations with what I'm talking about in today's video. I'm purely just talking about it from the HVAC industry standard, especially for us here in the marine HVAC industry. So we're just looking ahead to a safer and cleaner environment. These chemicals are just, going to be better for the environment. They're just safer. They don't have as high of a GWP as we used to have, so we don't have to worry as much about how much we're letting off into the atmosphere as we did before. Obviously, none of them have ozone depletion, so we don't have to worry about that anymore either. But even like, with A3s, for example, propane and isobutane, some of them have like in the single digit GWPs. Like, these chemicals are not bad, and they're naturally occurring. Propane and methane and isobutane and stuff, some of them are normal chemicals that you are breathing a small, tiny, minute percentage in all the time because they are naturally occurring in the atmosphere. They're not man-made chemicals. So I think that that's just good for everybody, that we're moving toward a safer and cleaner environment. Another good thing that we're getting out this is a little bit more efficiency. It's not much. Most people are claiming between 5 and 10% efficiency gains. For us, we actually saw lower power consumption. So I just did a video where I talked about our M16, our 16,500 BTU marine air conditioning system. And basically across the board, we lost an amp, and in some areas we lost 2 amps of power draw. That's about a 10% reduction, between 5 and 10% reduction on our AC unit's power draw, which is kind of crazy without changing anything other than the refrigerant, all the other components. The compressor itself is actually rated for 410/R32, so it's kind of cool that that compressor can do both refrigerants, because like I said before, 410A is basically just a mixture of R32 and another refrigerant, and the R32 is doing most of the work. So a lot of compressors that you might see coming out in the future, they might have that slash tag where the compressor can handle either refrigerant, and you can install it with either or refrigerant. And then we're also seeing less refrigerant usage in general. So for example, I was explaining in the M16 video that our usage in refrigerant in that unit is down to around half of what we were using before. So not only is there less to escape the unit out into the environment, but the chemical is also less harmful to the environment. So I think that all of these things together, these are really good things to keep in mind as we move forward, as the conversation evolves. I understand that this is a complicated topic, and I understand that there's a lot of people just now learning about this, and there's a lot of people that still haven't even learned about this. There's a lot that isn't even going out onto the news yet. There have actually been some local news stations. I'm down here in Southwest Florida. There have been some news organizations that have touched on the new refrigerants and the new HVAC equipment that you have to install in your house. But all in all, it's pretty quiet. Like, I'm just being honest. Like, you know, I have a buddy who owns an AC company here in Cape Coral, and he's installed a lot of them. And these systems work. They work very well. They have very few issues. We haven't seen any major problems. And in all honesty, these refrigerants, R32 for example, has been in use around the world since 2012. It was introduced by Daikin into Japan in 2012. And there's a lot of countries that have already incorporated R32 as their primary air conditioning refrigerant. So we in the US are actually kind of late adopters to this. And in all honesty, there's nothing to worry about. It's actually a really good refrigerant. After having used it now, it's been about 6 months that we've had it here at this facility. I'm very happy with the performance we're getting out of it. I'm very happy with how easy it is to work with. And yeah, there's some extra considerations we have to take into consideration with it. There's extra things that we have to pay attention to, extra labeling that I have to put on my systems. But all of that to say, it's good. And these changes are cool. And this won't be the last one. We've already seen 1995, there was a change. We're making changes again now. There's going to be a change someday in the future. And we just always have to be ready for that. The HVAC industry has never had a moment where it wasn't pushing the limits, pushing the boundaries, and we're always going to be trying to have that cutting edge over everything else, because everyone is trying to get those couple more percentage points in efficiency, that couple more watts of power draw that they got down over their competitor. Everybody's always working toward a common goal of more efficiency, cleaner, more dependable products, and there's just so much cool things that are happening out in the industry right now. So I highly recommend that you check out some other HVAC pages that are doing this. I spoke about the ESCO Institute, the ESCO Group, as well as things like HVAC School. But if you want to learn more about this stuff than I have today, than I've dived into, I tried to just give a brief, good detailed overview over everything that's happening right now. And just go check those out if you want to learn more, because I really encourage that people try to get as informed as they can. And at any time, you are welcome to contact me here at the FMS Factory. Our phone number and our website will be linked in the video description below. If you'd like to talk to me directly or have some questions, you can reach out to me here at the office, or you can put a comment in the video description and I'll try and be as succinct as I can in the comment section. But today, thank you so much for watching today's video. Thanks for sticking through it with everything that we're discussing. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I gave you all the information you need to know. Like I said, go check out the ESCO Institute. Thank you so much for letting me use their section of the video. Everything else, all the other sources that I was talking about in this video are going to be linked down below, including a PDF to the technology transitions PDF from the EPA. That's kind of just a fact sheet, kind of showing you what I've been talking about today. It's where I got a lot of the EPA based times and dates and numbers from. It's where a lot of people have been drawing their information from. Throw a comment down in the comment section. I would love to hear from you guys. Hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. Hit that like button if you like this video, and we will see you next time.